Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast that is dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic silence that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha. I'm a forensic scientist and criminologist. Welcome to Exhuming the Truth. Hello and welcome back to Exhuming the Truth. My name is Asha. I nearly just called myself Asha Walther. My name is Asha Carmody, not Asha Walther. I am newly married, can you tell? Anyway, this is Exhuming the Truth. I am your host. I am also a forensic scientist and a criminologist. So tonight we're doing something a little bit different. Now, this is a typical Exhuming the Truth episode. However, we are talking about a case that is certainly in the spotlight at the moment all across the world, and that's thanks to its new documentary on Netflix. It is called The Crash, and we're going to be talking a bit about vehicles as weapons tonight, which is a little bit different than what we're usually talking about. And when does a car accident or a car crash become murder? So you may or may not have seen The Crash. It's out right now. There's a few things I hate about it. I'm not going to lie. I do love a good documentary. I have found, however, a lot of Netflix's documentaries side with the wrong side. I find there's not adequate evidence to tell you the whole truth, if that makes sense. And I don't love that. And I didn't love about this one. I had heard the story of this case where essentially what I knew was there was a young girl, she was in a relationship, she had her boyfriend in the vehicle and a friend in the back seat of the vehicle, and they crashed the car. And the two boys passed away and she survived, and then she got charged with murder. So that's basically the background that I had of it. My mum had told me about it because she had watched an episode on it before it came out on Netflix. And I kind of read into it a little bit. Now, because it's not an Australian case, I do prioritise my clients' cases first and foremost, then Australian cases, and then I try and keep up to date with what's going on in the world, particularly in America, because there's always a lot going on there. But this one, it immediately pissed me off when I heard that it was available on Netflix and the cover photo was of the offender's face. That really, really pissed me off. I feel like if we're doing a documentary about people losing their life and kind of telling the story of how that came about, their faces and names should be front and center, obviously with permission. And if that's not the case, then that might not be the case here, but it just really pissed me off because it kind of, it's kind of, it makes sense, I guess, in this case when you look further into it because it suits her personality to kind of have her face on there, but that pissed me off. Anyway, gave me the ick, if you will, if you can do that with watching documentaries. Now, I have decided to call this episode the Strongsville Crash, what happened to Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. We're going to be going into the forensics of this and how it is possible to recreate a crime scene when it involves a vehicle. There's a lot of forensic components to this. There's even, a segment that we're going to do. If you do want part 2, we will do it and we'll go into the EDV, which is essentially like a vehicle's modern day black box, which you'd find in a plane. We're going to talk about phone data, digital evidence, all these things that build up a case and build the evidentiary value of a case. And this one is a case that I have enjoyed learning about only because it is very evidence heavy when you look in different directions. Obviously, it's a very sad case. It's devastating, this whole thing. 2 young lives were lost and it's incredibly sad. The documentary was well put together. Like I said, I do wish that they included more evidence, and the evidence that was not included in that documentary, I'm going to include it. So if you have missed out, don't worry, I'll have you covered. I have made a bunch of notes in case I have forgotten any pieces of information. And I want to give you a bit of context to this case because this is an American case, so we do have America is in our top 5 listeners, so we may have Americans listening tonight. Australia is obviously number one because I'm Australian. But when we're talking about the crash, we have to remember conversions. So when we're talking about the vehicle crashing at 100 miles per hour in Australia, that equates to approximately 160 kilometers per hour, which is absolutely insane. So little things like that matter, and I'll try and do the conversions as we go along. But if I don't, please feel free to pull me up on that. But anyway, we're talking about this documentary, we're talking about this case, we're talking about Dominic and Davion and how they came to lose their lives. We're going to talk about, the facts of the case as it is, and then we're going to go into the absolute detail of the prior. Why we talk about the prior, you might be thinking, because it gives us a whole picture of who a person is, particularly an offender, their behaviour in life, like their general life choices, the way they behave, the way they act. That all very much matters when we're doing like a criminological analysis. It's obviously psychology as well, but it does matter a lot for evidence. It's obviously also contextual evidence, I guess. But we'll do that a bit later. We're just going to go through from A to B first, so everybody has a bit of a clear mind on where we're at. Like I said, there's heaps of things I could do so many parts to this case because it's so dense and heavy, but I'm not going to do that unless people want me to, because otherwise I'll start waffling. While I'm on that, I did get a lot of requests for parts 2 and 3 for Gus Lamont. They're coming. Now, let's go back. This is in 2022. Okay, so it's 2026 right now. This is 2022, and you've got to remember that it does take time. It actually did take time in this case for it to be, to make an arrest, because initially they were like, is this a crime? Did a crime occur here? Because a lot of the time there's car accidents and no one's at fault, or, lots of things happen on the road. I'm not going to go into all of them or we'll be here all night. But this was the 31st of July 2022. It's a very early morning, okay, because the night before, the 30th of July, they were out and about with friends, socialising and what have you. So this is really early in the morning, around 5:30 a.m. Now, Strongsville is in Ohio, and we have the offender Mackenzie Shirilla. And Mackenzie was 17 years old at the time of this car accident. Now, the 31st of July, 2022, it's around 5:30 in the morning. It's very quiet, obviously, not many people out and about at that time. This is an industrial area of Strongsville, okay? So this isn't a residential area, it's industrial, and it just so happened that there were businesses in that area that happened to capture this entire thing on CCTV. So Mackenzie Shirilla is driving her vehicle. It's a Toyota Camry, and she has turned into a street normally. She's driving the speed limit. She slows down to turn right onto this street, like it's very calm, calculated driving. Then from there to the accident is just completely erratic, okay? She accelerates hard to 100 miles per hour, so that's give or take 160 kilometers per hour in Australia, and slams her vehicle into a commercial building. Now, inside that vehicle, she's in the driver's seat. Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, is in the passenger seat, and in the rear is Davion Flanagan. And Davion he's a friend of both of them, but not really Mackenzie. He was introduced to Mackenzie from her partner, Dominic, so it is more so Dominic's friend. So Mackenzie's 17 years old, she is driving. Her partner, Dom's 20, he's in the passenger seat, and their friend, Davion's 19, in the rear seat. Now, on arrival, both boys are pronounced dead. Who called 911, you ask? There was somebody doing their morning run, and at around 6:15 a.m., they've noticed the crash and called 911. Now, when officers and ambulance were on scene, so I believe they had fire and ambulance on scene, they pronounced both of the males dead. Mackenzie was unconscious but breathing, and she was flown to hospital. Now, she is the youngest, obviously, and she is driving. And this is something where you're going to be like, you're either going to be on one side or the other. Because when you look at it like this, you do think, well, it could have been just an accident. And sure, it could have been. But industrial areas and residential areas in Australia are typically 50 kilometres an hour. It's not much. It's not typical to see somebody going 160 in those types of areas, particularly constant acceleration. And this is where the forensics really comes into it when we break it down. And I think you're going to find it really interesting because we're approaching this entire case from that angle, from the evidence angle, forensics. We're doing everything, like move over social media narrative, throw it out the window. We're focusing on the forensic evidence. And if you're wondering what side of the fence I'm on, I am going to tell you, but not yet, because I'm going to give you a bit more information first, and I want to see where you lie on either side of this fence, because this case sits at a very uncomfortable intersection of this collision forensically, the digital behavioral evidence. Of course, we have a lot of it's 2022 when this happened, but there's still a lot of things we can uncover from modern vehicles, mobile devices, and things like that, CCTV even. We have toxicology involved here. Yay for me, because I majored in toxicology and I love that. We have psychology in here. We have modern digital life. Like, there's so many things here at play that it's so uncomfortable in the middle to be there. And at the center of this, of course, and in all of the cases that we talk about, the front and center of every case are the victims who have lost their lives. And it's an incredible tragedy, and this is a very violent and horrific way to die, and they never had a chance, essentially, in this case. And particularly if you have a look at the CCTV, you can see that they really just did not stand a chance. Now, before we discuss Mackenzie Shirilla, the offender and the driver, we need to talk about Dominic and Davion, because they're not side characters in this story. They are the victims. This is their story. And essentially, this is justice for their lives. Like, this is what this whole thing's about. It's not about her. This is why it pissed me off that her face was on the front of the documentary. Like, this is not about her. Yes, she caused this, but this is their lives that were cut short, and their family who have to deal with this. So let's talk about them first so you can get to know them a little bit. Now, I'm going to look at my notes a little bit because I don't want to get it wrong. Close. Sorry. Now, let's talk about Dominic. I might refer to him as Dom here and there. Sorry, I have another microphone on my lap. Get rid of that. I thought it'd be distracting because my kids got it for me and it flashes different coloured lights. Anyway, so we have Dominic Russo, and he was 20 years old at the time when he passed away. And he's from a really large family. I was actually really surprised because he is the youngest of 7 kids, which is huge and not overly typical. So we have his dad, Frank, and his mum, Christine, and then, of course, we have his siblings. Now, when you're watching the crash, and I don't mean the actual crash, when you're watching the documentary named The Crash, you will see a bit of Dominic's dad, Frank, and one of his sisters, and they sit down and have quite a bit of a chat. They're lovely. Here now, Dom and Mackenzie had been in a relationship for a number of years, and apparently it was a very on-again, off-again relationship. There's evidence to that, which we'll get into later, but they'd been together for approximately 3 years. Now, there are multiple witnesses who came forward in this time frame after the incident that were able to confirm this was very on again and off again and very volatile. And the offender who was, provoking things, if you will, was Mackenzie. It was very emotionally intense. There were many occasions that Dom had actually used his mobile device to film and record both video and audio of times where she was quite volatile, hostile, if you will, emotionally manipulative. There's a lot of clips that you can listen to or watch that show her behavior toward him. And if you do not open this door right now, I will key your car. Things like that. It's really uncomfortable to watch, but it's very important background behavioral profiling for this case. And it's very, very relevant to this case. It shows their relationship and the way she behaved. And yeah, we'll get back into the details of that. But there was one prior incident between Dom and Mackenzie, and that became really particularly important throughout the trial because there was an incident where she was driving her vehicle, the Toyota Camry, that she crashed. And Dom was in the passenger seat, and he was getting so uncomfortable with her erratic driving that he had tried to call his mum. And the intent behind that was he was trying to get in contact with her to say, hey, like, I'm uncomfortable. Can you please come pick me up? She's driving crazy. But the mum did not pick up. She was busy at that time. So instead he phoned a friend, and his friend actually managed to catch up to the vehicle where they were after being on the phone to Dom, and they had parked on the side of the road and Dom's door was open, and the friend pulled up behind them. And the friend heard when Dom phoned the friend and said, hey, like, this is where I am. Can you come and get me? Like, I'm so uncomfortable. She's driving crazy. The friend heard Mackenzie make a number of like really inappropriate remarks that were really concerning at that time. We're going to go into those a bit later, but they do refer to her driving and threats and possibilities of harming Dom. And the friend said that, which is very admissible evidence, but this friend did say that when he pulled up and got out and Dom's car door was open, Mackenzie was hitting Dom with both arms, which is incredibly concerning. And that detail, all of these details, in fact, they matter incredibly because, all of these little things, they add up. And in fact, they're not even little. They're quite major. But in this case, there's so many things that they seem like sprinkles over the entire case, but they're all very big indicators. And the prosecutors, they actually later use all of this in their argument to say that, well, hey, Dom actually had fear for his life when he was with Mackenzie. Like, he had fear with what she was doing and how she was driving, and like fear that there might be a fatal crash actually because of all of these things accumulated. We'll come back to this. Now let's talk about Davion Flanagan. This is like such a beautiful person. You can tell he was actually adopted by a couple, and the night that they had the crash, he actually just needed a ride home. Like, he's not directly involved in this conflict between Dom and Mackenzie, this back and forward issues, on and off issues that they were having. He was out with his friends, who was Dom and other people, and just needed a ride home, and essentially has sadly become collateral damage, and it's really awful. But Davion, he and his two younger siblings, they were adopted by a couple called Scott and Jamie Flanagan, a beautiful couple. It's a very sad backstory for Davion and his siblings. Their parents were addicts, and they were put into the foster care system and had a really awful time. And then they were eventually adopted by Scott and Jamie, who described Davion and his siblings to be like really underweight and not well looked after, and they absolutely thrived in their new home with their new parents, which is just so beautiful. In fact, Davion, one of his younger sisters, she's so gorgeous. She spoke on the documentary, and Davion was very fit, very athletic. He had dreams to pursue sport, but he actually had a leg injury, so couldn't do that. So instead, he very quickly picked up a new career path, and he was pursuing, he had taught himself how to cut hair to become a barber, and wanted to open his own barber shop. And he had his own hopes and dreams, and all of these years that he should have been able to be here to live those out. And that was cut short on that very night, on the 30th to the 31st of July 2022. And according to prosecutors and the facts of this case, essentially, Davion was, collateral damage. And this is obviously, with all of the evidence backed up against Mackenzie, she had a tendency to have this really narcissistic behavior. And Davion has been caught up in this and lost his life from it. And it's very tragic and very sad. And if this was intentional, then Dominic is clearly Mackenzie's target in this, but Davion died too, and it's so sad. Anyway, let's talk about before the crash, because I got notes. So let's go back to 2022 again. And we have Mackenzie and Dom who have this relationship. It's very volatile. Like, they're literally arguing all the time. When you watch these documentaries and you kind of learn about the dynamics of the relationship, it's very clear that Mackenzie is a bit of a gold digger, if not a huge gold digger. She's posting TikToks of all of the presents she's receiving off Dom, and they're all very expensive and everything. Even her own dad speaks on this documentary. God, the irritation that those parents brought me. But the dad speaks on this documentary and he's like, don't quote me, but it's to the effect of that Dom was quite well-to-do. He worked hard and, was bringing in money, and he was spending a lot of money on her, and she liked that. And the dad said that, yep, she liked that. Like, this just made me feel sick to my stomach, to be honest, because knowing that he's doing this and he's spending his hard-earned money on her to please her, and then she's treating him the way that she was treating him, is just disgusting. And like I said, there were so many witnesses that actually came forward and were like, there were arguments, there were like, she was very possessive, she was emotionally abusive, she was like, there were lots of threats, and her driving behaviour came up on more than one occasion. And one alleged statement prosecutors reference was, and I quote, "I'm going to wreck this car right now." That's what she said to him. That was when they were driving. Now, forensic behavioural analysis is not about saying someone made a threat and then therefore they're guilty. It's about recognising the pattern of behaviour. This is a pattern, guys. There was more than one instance where vehicles were involved, threats were involved, and the two intertwined. This is pattern recognition, and it's very important for evidence, because when we're examining evidence, we're using so many things, and we can start with, if we are working on one person, and this person's obviously Mackenzie Shirilla and her behaviour, and is this, something that would fit her behaviour profile, we're looking at her prior behaviour. So we have people who went to school with this girl. Now, these three just graduated high school. People who went to high school with her were calling her a mean girl. They were calling her a bitch and all sorts of words. There were even accounts of her saying to people who said that they were depressed that she had told them to go KILL themselves. Like, it's awful. There were even, when this first came out and in the news on social media, there were so many comments on there from people who knew her personally from school being like, this girl is nasty. So all of this prior behaviour, it really matters. It's really important when we're doing collecting evidence. Then we have, of course, her escalation and her behavioural patterns of escalation. So going from, oh my God, I love you, thank you so much for these gifts, like love bombing, and then flipping to, I will crash this car right now. So we have that kind of coercive control that she is, like, she has this over him. Then we have the emotional. Well, she's quite volatile. She's emotionally volatile. That falls into coercive control as well, and that is pattern recognition. Control dynamics, also coercive control. Just so many things, and this is proving the point that these behaviours that she's portraying, they're consistent, and that's what we want to see. We want to pick up a bunch of behaviours, look at her life and her history, and say, okay, well, this is the consistent pattern of how she behaves. This is typical behaviour of hers. And that's what's happened here. It has not been difficult to collect the consistency of this really volatile behaviour, and very rocky, like very instantaneously hot and cold. Now, prosecutors also believe that there was emotional escalation prior to this crash. So what I mean by that is, like, there could have been a fight, an argument, what have you, and any of this could have caused her to do what she did. Now, let's talk about the night of the 30th of July / 31st of July, because as we said, the 30th of July evening is when they all got together, and it went on until the early hours of July 31, which of course is when the crash happened. So apparently they went to a graduation party before going to another friend's home that night. That was what they were doing. And when they had crashed the vehicle, investigators collected a bunch of evidence from the crash after they had extracted the people. Now, that included marijuana, which I'm going to refer to as grass so we don't get banned anywhere, mushrooms, and digital scales. Now, all of these three things were inside Mackenzie's Toyota Camry. And like I said a bit earlier, another thing that becomes massive in this case is toxicology, okay? And they, of course, did a toxicology report on Mackenzie after taking her blood. And her THC level, so this is in grass, was reportedly over the legal driving limit. Now, in Australia, it's not legal to smoke grass, so you wouldn't be driving with that in your system. There is no legal limit. The legal limit is nothing. So in America, I don't know if that's different. I did not look at that, probably should have. But this is where forensic nuance really matters, and I want to underline this massively because she had grass in her system and that THC level was over the legal driving limit, this impairment does not automatically exclude intent. You can be heavily impaired with any substance and still have intent. And it's really important that you know and learn immediately before we move forward that those two things can coexist. You can be intoxicated and have intent. They can both exist at the same time, and that's very important because you can still act deliberately when you're impaired by anything, alcohol, grass, what have you. And this distinction actually does become really critical in the court trial. Now, let's talk about the timeline. Let me go into my timeline notes because this drive's really important, and I'm going to do a reconstruction for you because why? Did anybody ask for this? No, they didn't. Will they? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but I want to do it because I haven't done a good vehicular reconstruction in a while, and they're one of my favorite things to do because they show precision and accuracy, and we can tell when we do a forensic reconstruction, this is one of the biggest things in proving somebody's guilt or somebody's innocence. And I want to show you how. I'm going to talk about it first, but I am going to do a recon for you. Now, we're talking about the drive. This is where the modern forensic evidence starts getting loud, and it's getting louder than the emotion, okay? So don't eliminate the emotion, just set it to the side just a little bit because we've got that CCTV footage in that industrial park area that shows this from beginning to end, okay? It's got the entire thing. You won't be able to access the entire thing where you see the actual crash. That's obviously for the dignity of the victims, but you will be able to see almost to the impact, and that, let me tell you, is plenty to see what you need to see to make up your mind. So we have the CCTV footage, and like I said earlier, it's turning carefully and slowly. It's doing a right-hand turn. Now, in Australia, our driver's seat is on the right hand, but in America, it's on the left. So she's on the left-hand side. She is slowly turning right, and she's turning right onto Progress Drive. She's not doing that erratically. She's not out of control. Notice this. Watch this clip. And I was going to say watch it slowly, but you don't need to. You can watch it in bloody real time because it is a nice, controlled, perfect right turn, nice and slow, slowed down, nothing dangerous about it. This person's not unconscious. This person is not incapacitated. This is a person who is driving in between the lines, doing the right thing, nice and slow. Some might say a controlled turn even. So now she has turned onto Alameda Drive, okay? Before heading deeper into this industrial area, how does she know where she's going, you ask? Well, wouldn't you like to know? Because this matters enormously. This area is not, a typical route that she or the other two boys would take to or from any of their residences because it is not on the way. This is definitely a detour. And how does she know where she's going? Well, because effectively, a few days before, thank you to the trusty old mobile phone, we are able to pick up on her GPS tracking and her geolocation And that tells us that in the days prior to this crash, Mackenzie Shirilla actually did a dry run. And if you don't know what a dry run is, it's basically a little bit of practice. She's gone to this area, she's done this exact drive, caught on this exact CCTV, done the exact right turn, and she has learnt where to go and where she is going to crash into. Bit weird, don't you think? She's also done this in the very early morning hours. Why, might you ask? Less people, maybe? Less people to catch her in there, I guess. She doesn't know that CCTV is a thing and it's watching her. She's got no other reason to be in there. Very weird. Now, the prosecution argued that there was absolutely zero logical reason for her to previously travel that way. That, like, what's there for her? She doesn't need to be there. Very interesting. And that's what would fall under behavioural evidence, again. And it's not proof on its own by any means, like that she drove in that area a few days prior. Is that proof on its own? No, it's not. But it is contextual evidence and it contributes to the larger picture. And when that contextual evidence aligns with forensic reconstructive evidence, then investigators start to look at things like her intention. And again, we're comparing that or adding it to, I guess, the layers of her prior behaviour. Why would she do this? Is this typical of her? Does she drive this way to and from work or school or mum and dad's house? Nope. So why is she here? And then the second time she's here, it causes a fatal crash. Why? Let's go into the acceleration, because this is all the little bits and pieces that we get to add together a bit later when we do a recon. Now, roughly 1 minute after this car, this Toyota Camry, enters this industrial area, and a second CCTV camera starts to be alerted to the movement of a vehicle, which is this Camry, and captures it as well. And it's capturing this Camry accelerating hard towards a building. Now, investigators later calculate, by doing a recon and using all of the things like the geo data, the location data, the CCTV footage off 2 cameras, lots of different things to be able to tell the speed that the vehicle was going. And they have stated in the court that they estimate the vehicle to have been exceeding 100 miles per hour, which, like I said earlier, in Australia, that's around 160 kilometers per hour. That is fucking fast. Who's going that speed? Who's going that speed in an industrial area? What's happening here? Now, if this was accidental loss of control, could it have been? Absolutely. I'm not ruling out the fact that this has never happened before, that somebody hasn't blacked out, had a medical episode, XYZ. I'm not ruling that out at all. But I want to tell you, using fact, why I believe that this was incredibly intentional. And do I think she deserves to be in prison? Yes, I do. And I think she should be in there for a lot longer. Anywho, was there an attempt to save themselves? Sorry, I have a hair clip stuck in my hair right now. It's bothering me. And no, the answer is no. And how do we know that? And we know that by a bunch of A, present evidence, and B, evidence that's not present. Sorry. What are you talking about? Now, I waffle on quite a lot about forensics and lots of other things when I'm talking about cases. But this one in particular, it gets me because I tell people over and over and over again that the lack of evidence is evidence itself. If you have all this evidence about one thing and nothing about another thing, that tells you a lot. And I'll go into what I'm talking about here, because if we are doing a crash reconstruction in this case, was there any braking? Now, we, of course, have acceleration and rapid acceleration and consistent acceleration. This is foot to the floor. Some in Australia would call that a lead foot. That is pushing that accelerator pedal down and not letting go for dear life. Okay, that is acceleration. That is consistent acceleration. Now, if you were bracing for impact or trying to avoid an impact, there's many things you would do, such as braking. steering the vehicle away from something that you might be in the line of, that you might be hitting. And a lot of the time that comes in the form of overcorrection, and that sometimes is what causes a crash, when a vehicle might overcorrect, and that means, turning too hard one way and then turning too hard the next way. And that causes lots of things that we are able to account for as evidence, such as skid marks, the evasive steering, the overcorrection, any evidence of a panic response, which is exactly what you would expect in that moment if you are driving the vehicle. You're going 100 miles per hour / 160 kilometers per hour, and you're trying to stop your vehicle from hitting a building in front of you. These are all the things you'll be doing. There was no braking here. There was no skid marks on the road, on any grass, nothing. There was CCTV footage to show that there's actually 2 bumps in the road. And by that, I mean a little bit of a curve. And she's perfectly gone whoop, whoop through that road at that speed. And I'm saying that for pure realization that should she have been having a medical episode, she probably wouldn't know exactly where to steer the vehicle, if you know what I mean. There was no overcorrection, not a single drop of evidence of a panic response. Like I said, that's, what you'd be looking for. And instead, the prosecutors argue, and I'm going to argue when I do this recon, that there was sustained acceleration, so consistent acceleration, like foot to the floor, directly into a fixed object. So there was not even any braking attempted before, they've left the road and gone onto the grass, because there is grass, obviously, before that building. Nothing. And that distinction is absolutely everything. There was consistent acceleration until impaction. I'm sorry. And it's not even like, we were going 60 or 80. No, like you were going top-notch speed in an industrial area, which you never should have been doing anyway. Should she have been having a medical episode, would the passenger in the passenger seat try to grab the steering wheel, and then there would be overcorrection, and then maybe a different type of accident? Like so many things. When you lose consciousness, for example, if you're driving, it puts your body into limp mode. So your legs and your arms, they would go limp, and you wouldn't be putting consistent pressure on the accelerator. Anyway, there's a number of times, and I don't want to take away from the amount of accidents that have occurred in true accidental high-speed crashes, because that's very real, and that's in entirely different circumstances, and I'm talking like every circumstance possible, because every time there is a true accidental high-speed vehicular crash, the driver almost always demonstrates survival reflexes, and those are things like I just spoke about, like braking, swerving, overcorrection, abrupt throttle release even. And it's a natural reflex, I guess, for humans to try to survive. We ain't here to try and die if there's a circumstance like that, unless we have the intent to. Think about that. Now, the physics of the impact. One of my favorite parts. Now, at around 100 miles per hour / 160 kilometers per hour, we have this Toyota Camry, yes? It becomes more than a car. I'm going to say that right now. This is a weapon, okay, at that speed. This is not a car. This is not transporting people. This becomes a projectile. It becomes a projectile weapon, and the kinetic energy that is generated from this speed in this vehicle is catastrophic. I think there's very common physics for most people to know. I don't think that that's very hard to understand. I think it's, in fact, very easy to comprehend that. I think that's why we have speed limits, and I think everybody who drives a vehicle can understand that quite well. And because the vehicle struck a brick building, that energy transfer, that this car has built up all of this kinetic energy going so fast, it's turned into a projectile weapon, and then it has transferred that energy to where when it hits the building? Nowhere, because it's hit a brick building. Therefore, it's come back into the occupants and they have died. They have absorbed that projectile energy that the car at that speed had produced, essentially. So this is not like a glancing collision or a rollover or a sideswipe or what have you. This is a head-on impact into a rigid brick structure. You need to consider that. That's evidence in itself. And from a biomechanical perspective, there was no way that all three of them were going to survive that. In fact, the chances of surviving that are very low. And I would imagine that if you were willing to drive your projectile weapon that quickly into a brick wall, you were also willing to lose your life. And it is my firm belief that this was an attempted murder-suicide. And I have no doubt in my mind. And I'm so, like, I don't like to put others down, but watching this documentary and listening to one of the girls speak who is a friend of Mackenzie's, and bless her soul, she's obviously a really kind girl. Like, that's what I'm taking away from this, because she made a comment that seemed so fucking stupid, excuse my French, but just like I watched it and I just wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and be like, listen to yourself. When they were talking about the context of Mackenzie potentially wanting to end her life or not, would she do that? This girl says, oh, like we go to McDonald's together and she won't even eat a McChicken because she loves herself so much, like she cares so much about what she puts into her body. Girl, your friend, Mackenzie, is smoking a blunt of grass like the size of my arm in these images that she's posting on TikTok and social media, like the biggest thing of grass she is smoking I've ever seen in my life. And like, I have seen some of that in my time with what I work with. Like, her parents allow this. They say that smoking grass is better than drinking alcohol. And apparently the father of this girl is an elementary school teacher who has actually just been stood down from his job today, apparently, I read. I don't know how true that is, but like, what the hell? He's sitting there being like, oh, I know she smokes grass, you know, it's better than drinking alcohol. We all do it every now and again. Like, this is not, you're excusing her behavior. And like, to know that she's doing this, like she's posting images of her with a blunt of grass in her mouth while driving a vehicle, and you as her parent are looking at this and being like, oh, you know, oh, well, like, you know, it's better than drinking. What the actual hell? Like, what chance in hell did they have at raising a normal citizen if this is their view? Anyway, and this girl, this friend being like, oh, she wouldn't even eat a McChicken. Like, I just, you know that meme of Homer Simpson just disappearing into the bush? That's what I wanted to do in my bed, because I was like, oh my God, like, someone shake that girl. She thinks that this person who has these giant eyelashes that she could have just flown off into the sky with is so innocent. And I'm looking at all of this evidence that is just piling on like Jenga against her. And it tells me so much about her personality, like her intent. There's not a fragment of doubt in my mind that she had gotten so worked up emotionally over whatever that she was absolutely willing to do a murder-suicide or a double murder-suicide. And she did not even care who was there. Like, pedestrians, she's got Davion in the back seat. She did not care in the slightest. And like, we're going to get into the medical situation where she claims she has POTS, which she very well might have POTS. But as somebody who suffered with POTS for a very long time, I am going to talk about it. The evidence stacks up against her. Like, it just makes me sick. Now, she survived with orthopedic injuries, so that just means like broken bones and things like that. And this survival is obviously very controversial because, like I said, I believe what I believe. And a lot of people are like, oh, why would she want to do that to herself? Why does anybody? Do you know what I mean? There's many people who lose their lives intentionally. Why? And there's always co-contributing factors. So we need to talk about it, because if she intended to crash, why did she survive? And the forensic biomechanics can partially answer that. Now, the survival outcome when it comes to crashes, it differs, but it depends on the seat position, so where she was obviously driving, the impact angle, so what way she was facing when she hit the brick wall and what way the car was facing, etc. The restraint systems, was she wearing a seatbelt? Bracing behavior, did she have the opportunity to brace? Crush intrusion, occupant kinetics and things like that. Now, it was said in the video where the first responders were there that Davion was in the back seat and Dom was in the front passenger seat. And they said when they arrived that actually Davion ended up in the front passenger seat with Dom, which is very sad. And that shows the impact. That shows how much kinetic energy was in that vehicle when they hit that wall. Now, the impact reportedly favoured the passenger side slightly, and this matters because the prosecution actually never needed to prove that she intended to survive. That wasn't a part of the trial. They didn't need to go into that. I am, because, well, actually I might go into it more when I do the recon, because it's going to make more sense when you see it, and then I can show you and explain to you at the same time. We'll come back to that. I'm sorry to, get you up and then push you back down again. We'll come there. Let's talk about POTS. What is POTS? It's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I was diagnosed with this a number of years ago. I take medication 6 times a day for it. I have it quite bad, amongst other issues. Now, she claims to have had it. She very well might. Now, she is saying, maybe I had a medical event due to POTS. And is that possible? Of course it is. I've actually had a POTS medical episode while driving and nearly crashed my car. And I was driving along the freeway in Australia. It was 110 kilometres an hour. I'm a responsible driver. I usually have my kids in the car, but on that day it was just me. And I felt, a lot of the time when you have POTS, the blood rushes away from your brain and into your body. And it makes your heart rate go quite high. It makes you really lightheaded. And I felt those effects coming on, as you typically do. And I fainted behind the wheel going 110 on a straight road. It was quite momentary, like a number of seconds. And when I woke up, my vehicle was in the median strip, so the middle section between both roads. It was on an angle nearly sideways, and it was stopped. So I'd hit like a couple of bushes. There wasn't like major damage to my car or anything. I did have to ring for help and whatever. I was fine. My car was essentially fine. But at no point did I maintain 110 acceleration on my acceleration pedal. At no point did I continue straight on the road and therefore know how to direct my limp, momentarily lifeless body. I certainly didn't go into rigor mortis and have my leg go stiff straight so that my foot went foot to the floor, sorry. Anyway, now POTS does involve, like I said, tachycardia, high heart rate, dizziness, syncope, so that's momentary fainting, pre-syncope, that's, knowing that that's coming on, tunnel vision, cognitive fog and things like that. It's shit. Like, it sucks. I'm not going to lie to you. And medical episodes do happen, of course, and they do happen behind the wheel. But the context matters, and it's so important because the physical evidence in this case doesn't match the claimed medical event. It just doesn't. Like, it could have if it was a regular crash, but the fact that it's foot to the floor at 100 miles per hour straight into I'm sorry. And it's not like a 2-second foot to the floor, bang, it's right there. This is, very intentional. Anyway, if it was a true POTS event or a blackout related incident, you would expect certain things to show up in evidence. And this is why we call it evidence, guys, because it proves, I have, if you haven't watched my very first episodes, I have a neurological disability from an accident, and I have to keep moving around because of my leg. And usually you don't know that because I do a lot of just audio podcasting, but since I've been doing video ones, people are like, why are you always moving around like that? That's why. yeah, you would expect the evidence to show, should she have had a medical episode where she's blacked out, an uncontrolled drift. So I'm talking like, maybe fishtailing through the road, maybe an inconsistent steering pattern because she might have been holding only one side and then she's blacked out and she's let go and therefore it's turned. You would also maybe expect the person in the passenger seat to try and correct that steering. You would expect gradual deceleration, not acceleration, because the pressure of the foot on that pedal would come up while your body's going a bit limp, and then therefore the acceleration would slow. You would have a random trajectory. You would for sure not be going definitely on that intended road in the exact spot in between the lines, as they were, might I add. There would be variable pedal pressure. Sometimes people might... I was going to say shimmer. That is not the word. Tremor. That's it. So the pedal might go a little bit fast and then slow off and then a little bit fast. But this crash showed like maintaining that acceleration at 100 miles per hour, the directed trajectory, like that's the building we're going to, that's where we're going, and we will do the appropriate turns as needed. Controlled steering before acceleration, no evidence of unconscious drift, nothing like that, no skid marks. And that just wipes out the medical claim. And even, when she was in the next episode, I'm going to include some audio from these clips where she says, can't we just say that like I fainted or something? She said something along those lines. No, we can't, is the answer, Mackenzie, because we have the physical evidence and it's not on your side. It's just not. And it's also really important for her, like lying harbors chronic illness if I've ever seen it. So like that's my advice to her. But anyway, let's move along. I know this is really long and I said I was going to do a couple of parts. I'm really sorry. I hope it's not too long. Anyway, if it is, you can pause, go make a snack or something. Let's talk about modern evidence, and by that I mean phones, GPSs, and a lovely app that I use that I can't show you because it's on the device that I'm recording with, but it is an app called Life 360, and I use that with my mum and my niece. And when my children are old enough to have devices, they will also be using it, and it's a really great app. Some might say intrusive, but not when you're using it for the right purposes. And obviously you do have to sign up and consent to using it and things like that. And it does relate to this case. I'll get there in a minute. My mum is awful at answering her telephone, and I am occasionally, I'm also awful at answering my personal phone, and I also have a lot of medical conditions and a disability, and my mum is consistently worrying if I'm okay, if everything's okay, particularly when I go and see my horses. She's always worried that I might have an accident because that's how I acquired my disability, and with this app, she can see where I am, how long I've been there for. It will report if there's a crash, things like that. It'll alert her if I've changed locations and where I am and things like that. And same with her. So if she's not answering my calls and I can see she's at work, I'm like, okay, well, she's at work. Annoying that she doesn't want to chat, but I know she's okay. It will report anything kind of sinister, which is really great. And then we have it for my niece because, she's at that age at the moment where she likes to wander around with her friends, and we like to know that she's safe and we look after her. So there's that. Now, why am I talking about this? Because it's a great app and because it comes into this case. And in the documentary, one of Dom's friends actually comes forward to the police once the investigation has started. Because you have to remember, this case did not start as like a murder trial. It was like, okay, this is a very sad crash. But as they looked further into it, they were like, okay, well, they got to Halloween actually of 2022, and Mackenzie was posting on TikTok just 3 months after she'd lost the love of her life and his friend, and, at the hands of her, essentially. She had posted TikTok videos of her on Halloween dressed up as a corpse. doesn't seem overly remorseful. In fact, seems very inappropriate. It was only 5 days after that she was arrested for the alleged murder of these two boys. And once that happened and people knew there was an investigation into this, then the friends came forward to the police and they said, hey, we actually have the Life 360 app and Dom's on it. Like we're on it with Dom. You can select who you're on there with, and they were able to use that data for our American listeners to say, well, this is, where he was and what was happening and things like that. And that's really useful because that with like GPS history, phone records, text, social media behavior, like I said, her betraying a corpse for Halloween 3 months after you've just killed two people. Of course, the way people communicate, the way they talk to each other. And then we have the vehicle data because we have modern vehicles now and not donkeys and horses. We can go, okay, well, this is what the vehicle's telling us. And modern cars actually record a large amount of information. And that includes the throttle position, the speed that the car was going, the braking, the steering input, so many things. And I'm going to get further into this, but I think I'm going to call it because it's been nearly an hour and I don't want to bore you too much. If you want part 2, which trust me, I've got it. I'm ready for it. Let me know because I am more than ready to release it and get into it. And I also really am dying to know what side of the fence you guys are on before this and after this. Anyway, this is part 1. I hope you've enjoyed it. My name is Asha Carmody. I'm a forensic scientist and criminologist. Please let me know if you liked it or not and make sure you follow along and subscribe to our work so we can help more people and get more stories out there. Thank you so much for being here. Have the best day.